That day, at the lavish wedding held in the bride's family villa, Aaron froze, his eyes locked onto the microphone. Everything around him suddenly fell silent. No music, no congratulations, no laughter. The atmosphere of happiness that had filled the ceremony was abruptly torn apart by a single remark. From the back of the hall, his mother-in-law, Regina, spoke clearly, her voice cutting through the air. "Look at that mother! What a mistake in a dress!" And then Emily, his bride-to-be, burst into laughter, clapping lightly as if it were nothing more than a joke. The room fell quiet for a second, then whispers and mocking laughter began to ripple through the crowd. But what stopped Aaron's breath was not Regina's words. It was the moment he looked into his mother's eyes. In that instant, everything seemed to collapse beneath his feet, the space shrinking until only he and his mother remained. In Regina and Emily's eyes, his mother Nora was nothing more than a frail old woman, living quietly in a distant countryside village, simple and insignificant. They treated her like something worthless, someone undeserving of respect, someone they did not need to consider. But Aaron could not ignore that insult. He had once believed love would carry him through anything, yet now that love felt like a heavy blanket pressing down on his shoulders. He had believed he would marry Emily, that her family would become his own, but now he could only see himself as someone being used, a tool in their game. Aaron stepped down from the altar and walked away with unwavering determination. He had never felt such tension coursing through him. The whispers followed him, but he did not turn back. He could not. As he stepped out of the ceremony, he saw his mother Nora standing still, her hand gripping her handbag, her expression calm as if she had already known what would happen. But Aaron understood that if she did nothing, if she remained silent, everything would only grow worse. Nora, the woman they saw as weak, invisible, a symbol of poverty, someone who could only live in the shadow of her late husband, was in truth someone who had endured every storm, the hardest years of her life, just to build a peaceful life for her son. And behind that calmness and humility lay a fortune no one could possibly imagine. For the past 15 years, Nora had quietly built an empire no one knew existed. It was not built on land or property, but on precision, patience, and intelligent investment strategies. In the beginning, after her husband passed away, she had only a small insurance payout, barely enough to survive. But she refused to accept that fate. She used it as a stepping stone, investing carefully, and step by step, she built a fortune worth $4,300,000. And she knew that if not for this moment, if not for Emily and Regina, she would have kept everything hidden and continued living in the modest shell of a gentle widow. But life has a way of unfolding beyond expectation. For Nora, everything changed on a summer day 6 months earlier, when Aaron told her about his upcoming marriage. His dreams, his promises, his belief in a bright future with Emily and her family. Yet Nora, through every gesture of Regina, sensed the disdain, the quiet judgment directed at her. And that was when she decided, it is time. She would not allow her son to live under the shadow of people who did not deserve him. For the first time in her life, she began mapping out her greatest plan. She would not only protect her son, she would teach Regina and Emily a lesson they would never forget. Nora began selling off part of her assets to invest in promising real estate projects. And over the following months, she quietly acquired shares in several key developments that the Walsh family was involved in. The price of silence had been calculated with precision, and it would lead to an ending no one could foresee. And now, after Aaron walked away from the wedding, Nora's story was only just beginning. She stepped forward, head held high, preparing for a battle she knew she would win. What she would do next would force everyone to reconsider the power of patience, the strength of humility, and above all, the depth of financial understanding they had failed to recognize. Nora's gaze was no longer just that of a mother protecting her son. It was the gaze of a warrior, ready to strike with precision, leaving her opponents no time to react. They had made the mistake of believing she was a poor, insignificant woman. But they would soon realize that in their world, poverty is not the absence of money, it is the absence of understanding. Nora stood by the window of her house as the morning light poured in, as if everything around her were drifting by gently, without weight or concern. But inside, she could clearly feel the tension rising, urging her toward what came next. She could no longer continue living in the shadow of false appearances. They had underestimated her, dismissed her far too easily, and now it was time to prove just how wrong they were. Everything was ready. She was not frail, not the poor, aging mother they believed her to be. Everyone in Willow Creek assumed she lived an ordinary life, with loaves of bread and simple meals, making small donations to the church, driving an old Honda Civic. But what they did not know was that for years she had lived simply to conceal the truth, that she was one of the most discreet and intelligent investors in the region. They never saw the numbers, never realized that she was not someone lacking money, but someone who understood exactly how to use it. And now she had built a fortune that, if revealed, would leave them stunned. Nora had taken her time with this plan. After her husband passed away, she refused to let hardship break her. Each month, she set aside a portion of the insurance money he left behind, investing wisely, learning from financial experts, steadily building a stable source of wealth. At first, the amounts were small, but over time they grew. For 15 years, she had quietly accumulated wealth, watching her investments expand day by day without anyone noticing. It was patience and careful calculation, without show, without noise. She had simply been ahead of her time, and now everything was ready to be revealed. At this moment, she realized her silence had lasted long enough. After the engagement party, where Regina and Emily had repeatedly belittled her, she began to see clearly that they had no respect for her, and more importantly, no respect for Aaron. That mother and daughter believed their wealth would bind her son to them, turning him into a piece of their family empire. But what they did not know was that in her hands, she held something far more powerful than money, knowledge, and strategy. As a single mother, Nora had taught Aaron the most important lesson, that a person's worth is not defined by how much they earn or where they come from, but by their perseverance and their ability to overcome adversity. And now she would use everything she had built to protect her son, to show Emily and Regina that not everyone can be oppressed because of their background, especially when they have no understanding of what others truly possess. Great decisions begin with small steps, and her first step was to meet Robert, her financial manager. He was the only person who fully understood her investments and the one who would help turn everything into reality. She recalled their conversation from the day before when he told her, "You've done very well, Nora. Your assets have now reached $4,300,000, and we can do even more if you want." And Nora had made her decision. It was time for everyone to see that she was not who they thought she was. She did not only want to protect her son, she wanted to show them that their contempt would come at a price. At the same time, while the Walsh family continued to live in their world of glamour, the real estate projects they had invested in were slowly reaching a dead end. Things were not as they seemed. Gordon, Regina's husband, was beginning to feel the pressure as his investments ran into serious trouble. Everything was far from stable, and the signs were pointing towards something going wrong. She spent an entire morning studying the projects the Walsh family was involved in, digging deeper into their assets, their debts, and the hidden risks. And then it revealed a remarkable opportunity, a plan to acquire shares in the very real estate holdings the Walsh family believed they controlled. Neither Gordon nor Regina realized that they were gradually losing control, while she was preparing to take over what they thought was securely theirs. But this was not just a typical business move. It was a game of power, one in which she would teach the Walsh family a lesson about arrogance. What she was about to do was not simply buying property. She would become the one holding control, and those who believed she had nothing would be forced into shock. They would never forget that in this world, what appears on the surface does not always reflect reality. And once she set her plan into motion, everything would change. Her story and her son's would move in a direction the Walsh family could never have imagined. After that night, Nora felt no unease at all. The events at the engagement party, Regina's sarcastic remarks, Emily's cold glances, all of it was simply part of the larger picture she had carefully constructed. Nora knew she was on the right path, But she also understood that victory would not come overnight. Everything required time, careful preparation, and execution with precision. If she wanted to regain control of her son's life and prove that her humility was not weakness, then patience was essential. She began the new day by sitting down with Robert, the financial manager who had been by her side for many years. He was the one who understood every investment she had made and the only person who knew the truth about her wealth. Nora set her cup of coffee down on the table and looked at him with quiet determination. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said, her voice as calm as ever. Robert nodded, his glasses catching the light in the office. "You've done very well, but if you want to continue, we need to take a bigger step." "A bigger step?" Nora curved her lips into a faint smile. "I think it's time I take a real step forward." Robert raised an eyebrow, unsure whether she was serious. But when she opened her financial records and pointed at the numbers, he understood that she meant every word. "I want to shift direction slightly," she said, her voice steady with confidence. "I want to invest in the projects the Walsh family is involved in, and I need your help to make that happen." A few days later, Nora began making important calls. Each call carried her further along the path she had chosen. The real estate projects that Gordon Walsh had been building with such effort, the investments that once seemed invaluable, were beginning to reveal their hidden risks. Gordon and Regina had no idea that they had already begun making mistakes, blinded by their own confidence in their wealth. While the Walsh family continued to live in their world of glamour, surrounded by lavish parties and elegant gatherings, Nora Clee studied them. She knew that in the world of the wealthy, what mattered most was not money itself, but the ability to maintain and expand power. And she understood that to gain power, one does not always need to display it. Sometimes it is enough to move in silence and wait for the right moment. She examined Gordon's investments in detail, the assets he owned, and quickly realized that they were nothing more than hollow shells. The shops, restaurants, and properties he took pride in no longer generated stable profits. Mounting debts, rising maintenance costs, and dependence on major partners had turned Gordon into a piece within his own game. Nora was not a reckless investor. She was someone ahead of her time, able to see what others could not. She had already predicted that these projects would fail in the near future, and if she did not act quickly, she would lose the opportunity to claim the position she deserved. Through a series of calls and with the support of experts in the real estate field, Nora gradually gained access to the projects the Walsh family had invested in. She acquired shares from smaller investors, taking control of parcels of land that Gordon believed would belong to him forever. When she received the final confirmation that the acquisition of shares in the Riverside Shopping Center project had been completed, she simply smiled. Now, she was no longer the simple, poor woman Regina and Emily had believed her to be. She had become a person of real power, with assets and influence strong enough to shift the balance. But more importantly, she had done all of this without leaving a single trace for them to detect. As she stepped out of the office, she felt as though she had just secured a major victory. But she also knew that the true victory would come when she could see the shock in Gordon and Regina's eyes. They would never realize that she had been quietly building her empire over all these years. And she would not allow anyone, especially the Walsh family, to mistake her patience for weakness. The first shocks had only just begun. Nora knew that while they were still enjoying their wealth and power, she would soon take away what they believed was permanent. And this time, she would not let anyone stand in her way. Everything they thought about her would soon turn into hard lessons about arrogance, and they would pay the price for underestimating this gentle woman. With every step Nora took, the change was not yet visible. The world around her continued to move quietly. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But she knew that beneath that calm surface, everything was preparing to shift. The time had come for her to make her final decisions, not only for her son, but for herself. The days of living in someone else's shadow, enduring disrespectful words, had come to an end. And when everything was ready, Nora began to do things no one could have imagined. She had been preparing in silence for weeks. Everything was gradually falling into place within a perfect plan she had carefully constructed. No one knew that beyond tending to her daily life, she had been quietly mapping out a path to rise to the top. Every phone call, every meeting with experts, every contract signed played a crucial role in transforming her from a humble woman into a powerful figure in the financial world. One morning, as warm sunlight streamed through the window, Nora sat in her familiar kitchen, a cup of coffee still warm in her hand. She had already made calls to key partners to set in motion a major breakthrough. Everything appeared normal, yet inside she felt a restless anticipation, as if a storm were about to rise. And when she received a call from Robert, the man who had stood beside her all this time, everything was finally in place. His voice carried a hint of excitement. "Nora, I've reviewed your investments again, and I have good news. We've completed the transfer of shares in the Riverside Shopping Center project. You now officially have control of it." This was the decisive move she had planned for so long. Riverside Shopping Center was not just an ordinary real estate project. It was part of a chain of strategic investments Nora had quietly poured money into. With this control, she not only gained the upper hand in the financial game, but also the power to make Gordon Walsh and his entire family bow their heads. Surely, in recent days, the Walsh family still believed they had achieved everything they wanted. Gordon, with his grand real estate developments, his luxurious stores, and his powerful connections, continued to believe he held everything in his hands. But he did not realize that beneath that glossy exterior lay a fragile empire, one slowly collapsing under the weight of decisions he did not even recognize as mistakes. The calls Nora made afterward made her feel as though she were steering a massive ship approaching its harbor. She had identified the weaknesses in Gordon's business strategy, and now it would only take a single touch for everything to change. "Like, what do we do next?" Nora asked Robert, confidence filling her voice. "You already have control of Riverside Shopping Center, and I think we should consider expanding into other projects. But the most important thing is that you must keep everything confidential until it is fully completed." Nora nodded, carefully taking in every word of Robert's advice. She did not rush. She understood that everything had to unfold gradually, step by step. And the next step was to ensure that Gordon would not recognize the danger until it was far too late. The days that followed passed in silence. Gordon had no idea that he was gradually losing control. His projects began to encounter difficulties. Some of the stores he once took pride in started to suffer losses. Debts to major partners grew increasingly tense. These consecutive shocks, though small, made him uneasy. Yet in those very moments, Nora moved through the market with absolute composure. A month later, when all her preparations were complete, Nora finally sent a clear message to the Walsh family. She did not need to make a grand gesture. She did not need to speak publicly. All she had to do was let them see that when patience is cultivated in silence, it eventually blooms into undeniable results. That day, as Nora sat in her office looking out the window, she received a call from Tyler, her son. His voice was filled with excitement. "Mom, I've seen everything. What did you do? What you've done with the investments? What you've acquired? We've succeeded. You've built my future." Nora smiled, unable to hide the pride in her eyes. "My son, this is how I have lived my entire life. No one knows what the future holds if we do not prepare for it today." Tyler could hardly believe what his mother had accomplished. Even though he had never wanted to step into the Walsh family's business world, with everything Nora had built, he no longer had to worry about anything. Everything had already been prepared. What Nora felt in that moment was not just victory in a financial game. It was the feeling of a mother who had protected her child, who had taught her son that no one has the right to look down on them because of their background. What she had done was not for money or power, but for something called dignity. And from this moment on, no one would ever be able to underestimate her or her family again. Everything was only just beginning, and Nora knew she would never have to look back. In the days after the critical decisions had been made, nothing seemed to change in Nora's home. The small kitchen where she sat every morning sipping her hot coffee remained the same, yet inside her, something profound had shifted. The shocks she had carefully arranged were now beginning to surface, not as isolated events, but as a chain of dominoes ready to fall. Nora could clearly feel that everything she had prepared for so long was finally unfolding, and this time, it would be different from before. Everything she did now had only one purpose: to teach the Walsh family a lesson about arrogance. Each morning, Nora continued her routine as usual, but today felt different. There was a quiet confidence within her, as if she were standing at the edge of a storm, knowing everything would change after the coming breakthrough. The first sign came with a call from Robert, the man who had become an essential part of her plan. "We've achieved what we set out to do, Nora," Robert said, his voice calm yet carrying a note of satisfaction. "The properties we've acquired are no longer worthless pieces of land. They've started generating profit." Nora smiled, a proud but understated smile. "Good. Now it's time to move forward. We've begun. Now it's time to reap the results." Under Nora's skillful direction, the properties the Walsh family believed they controlled had quietly fallen into her hands. Gordon's investments began to reveal their weaknesses, and everything he once took pride in was now on a steady decline. Debts were increasing, investment opportunities were no longer as profitable as before. Gradually, Gordon's company began to lose momentum, and those within the industry could not help but notice that the Walsh family's control was slipping away. One late afternoon, as a light rain fell outside the window, Nora sat in her living room with her phone in hand. The feeling within her was like a rising wave, ready to break. She had found Gordon Walsh's final weakness, his dependence on contracts with major partners, and all of it was now within her reach. With the final calls to investors, she began completing deals that once seemed impossible. Under Nora's control, Gordon's projects grew increasingly fragile. The investments he had once relied on no longer delivered the returns they used to. The uncertainty in his financial management had now become Nora's advantage. Meanwhile, the Walsh family continued to live in their world of glamour. Lavish parties, high society gatherings, luxurious villas all carried on as before. But Nora knew that all of it was merely a facade. What they believed to be secure was now cracking day by day. Each time she received updates from Robert about asset transfers, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She knew every step was correct, every decision contributed to reshaping her life and her son's future. One morning, Tyler, her son, called her, his voice filled with excitement. "Mom, have you seen it? What you're doing, everything is working. What you invested in, what we now control, it's all starting to pay off." Nora smiled softly, the feeling of a mother in that moment, unlike anything before. She had taught her son how to stand firm in hardship, how to see things from a different perspective. "My son, I am only part of a bigger story. Nothing comes from luck. It comes from preparation." When the call ended, Nora sat quietly in the living room, looking out at the rain. It was still falling, yet she did not feel alone. In fact, she felt a rare sense of peace, a calm she had never known before. Everything was now within her grasp, and she knew no one could stop her. On another afternoon, when Tyler returned home after a long day, he stepped inside and looked at his mother with admiration. "Mom, I can't believe what you've done. Everything has changed. You're not just my mother anymore. You're a woman who can change the world." Nora simply smiled, but in her eyes was an immense pride. She had not only changed her own life, she had helped her son discover his true worth. And more importantly, she had taught the Walsh family a painful lesson. Arrogance leads only to collapse. This was not the end. Nora knew that every change had only just begun. She had started a new journey, the journey of a woman who had risen from a poor, underestimated widow to a powerful queen. Now, everything she had done would have a profound impact not only on her family, but also on those who had once looked down on her. As life moved forward, the storms of change still gathered quietly beneath the surface. But Nora was ready to face it all. She no longer needed to prove anything. What she had done was enough for everyone to understand that in this world, silence is not weakness. It is the greatest strength of all. On a cold autumn morning, Nora sat in her living room, holding a warm cup of coffee in her hands, yet her mind was far from at ease. The excitement and pride from her recent moves had settled, replaced by the calm of someone who now saw the entire game clearly. Everything seemed to be within her grasp, but it was only the beginning. The shocks she had set in motion were still unfolding. and Nora knew that now was the time to prove to the Walsh family and to her son that everything she had done was not luck, but the result of intelligence, patience, and long-term strategy. As each day passed, her actions in the real estate sector began to make the Walsh family gradually feel the shift. Doors they once believed would remain closed forever were now opening, but not to welcome them. Unpaid debts, questionable contracts that Gordon Walsh had signed, were slowly coming to light. The Riverside Shopping Center project, which the Walsh family was involved in, was no longer just facing serious financial trouble, it was also at risk of losing control. Both Gordon and Regina failed to see the truth that what they once called a strategic project was turning into a burden, a debt they could not repay. That day, Nora walked into her office carrying a black briefcase. Inside were the important documents she had kept hidden. After receiving a call from Robert, she knew it was time for the next steps. Robert, the man she had trusted throughout her investment journey, had now become more essential than ever. "We have good news, Nora," Robert said, his voice filled with excitement. "The Walsh family's Riverside project is facing serious difficulties. Even some major investors have started pulling out." Nora gave a slight smile, not too broad but firm. "So they've finally seen the truth, haven't they?" "That's right, Nora, and you know we can't miss this opportunity. You are now fully in control of the situation." A sense of pride rose within her, but she did not let it show. In truth, she did not feel that she had won. What she needed was to prove that the Walsh family would have to pay for their arrogance. They had once believed that power, wealth, and connections could shield them from anything. But now they would face the opposite. Their own decisions had begun to push them into difficulty. That day, after signing a series of important contracts, Nora felt that a major shift was approaching. She did not want to rush, because she knew that when things moved too quickly, mistakes were easily made. What she needed was precision. She had entered this race with a long-term strategy, and she would not stop until everything she intended to achieve became reality. In the following days, tension began to rise within the Walsh family. The undercurrents were building, yet none of them realized that it was all the result of their own past decisions. Gordon, who had always been proud of his business abilities, now had to face criticism from his partners. His stores began to show signs of decline. His investments no longer generated the returns they once did. And what troubled him even more was that he could not control the moves coming from Nora. Gordon began to feel confused and afraid. He had heard rumors that his investments were being taken over by a new force, but he could not believe that it was Nora, the very woman he had looked down on for so long. As for Regina, although she was not directly involved in the meetings, she could clearly sense the shift. The arrogance she had built over the years was beginning to crumble. Meanwhile, Tyler, Nora's son, was also feeling the change. He looked at his mother with a new sense of respect. What she was doing was not only to protect the family, it was a powerful lesson on how to face intrusion and value one's own worth. Even though he had no desire to step into the Walsh family's world, what Nora had done made him realize that nothing is impossible if one knows how to act wisely. One day, Tyler decided to sit down with his mother to discuss the future. He could not help but feel proud of what she had accomplished. "Mom, I can't believe what you're doing. You've done something incredible, not just for us, but for everyone who ever looked down on you." Nora looked at her son, her eyes gentle yet sharp. "My son, I am not doing this for revenge, but for fairness. No one has the right to look down on us because of where we come from or what they think of us." Tyler nodded, his eyes bright. "I understand now, Mom, and I will always stand by you because I know what you've done for this family." Everything had begun to change. She had not only taught her son about self-worth, but also how to stand firm in the face of challenges. The precise and calculated moves Nora had made were beginning to shake the Walsh family, and she knew that in the near future they would have to face the consequences of the contempt they had shown her. A month after everything had begun to unfold, Nora felt an almost uncanny calm. She had done what needed to be done, made the critical moves, and now all that remained was to watch events play out. The Walsh family was still there, living in their arrogance and self-satisfaction, but inside her, everything had changed. The truth she had hidden for so many years, the determination she had carried within her, was now slowly revealing itself. And what it brought was not simply a sense of victory, but a quiet assertion of power, clarity, and the unsettling silence she had always maintained. Nora did not rush. She understood that everything had to follow the plan. When facing the Walsh family, one could not reveal satisfaction too soon. What she had done, the projects she had acquired, the assets she now controlled, were only the first steps in a long strategy. What she sought was not recognition from others, but a shift in their thinking. She wanted them to see that while they had viewed her as weak, it was they who had led themselves to their own downfall. Gordon Walsh began to feel the pressure in every step he took. Shocks from partners, gradual failures came one after another, like doors closing around him. The projects he had once taken pride in were now turning into financial burdens he could no longer manage. His arrogance prevented him from seeing the warning signs right in front of him. But Nora knew clearly that she was in control of the entire situation. The Riverside Shopping Center project, which Gordon had considered his pride and final hope, was no longer the gold mine he once believed it to be. His partners were withdrawing, and the contractual terms he had signed were revealing serious flaws. Only now did Gordon begin to feel anxious, but his concern came far too late. "What have we done, Gordon?" one of his partners, an influential figure in the real estate industry, said over the phone after hearing about the instability of the project. "This cannot continue. We're going to have to pull out." Gordon stood frozen, gripping his phone tightly, unable to do anything but listen to those blunt words. The project he had believed would save him was collapsing in his hands, and it was all the result of the poor decisions he had made over time. Meanwhile, Regina remained unaware of what was happening. She continued to live in the glamour of her life, unable to see the danger approaching. She moved from one meeting to another, still relying on the powerful connections the Walsh family had built over generations. But Nora knew that Regina's arrogance would not last forever. She had seen everything, and she was prepared for it. At the same time, Tyler, Nora's son, began to see the changes clearly. After months of living in the shadow of silence, he now realized that his mother was not just the gentle woman he once believed her to be. She was not only the one who had sacrificed to raise him, but a woman of strength, intelligence, and patience that could not be defeated. She had not only built a future for herself, but for her son as well. "I can't believe everything you've done," Tyler said as he sat with her after a morning of work. "You've changed everything. I've lived in misunderstanding for so many years. Now I understand that everything you've done has a reason, and we're now in a position where no one can touch us." Nora smiled at her son, her eyes filled with pride. "You've learned the most important lesson, Tyler. Never let anyone look down on you. No matter how powerful they are, silence and careful preparation will help you overcome everything." The pride she felt did not come only from her financial success. She felt happiness seeing her son grow, understanding that success is not just about money, but about resilience, wisdom, and strategic vision. Tyler had changed. He was no longer an uncertain young man, but someone who could stand on his own, not because of the Walsh family, but because of himself. Nora knew that even though her son had matured, there was still one important task left: to teach the Walsh family that arrogance does not always lead to success. They had believed they could control everything simply because they had money and power. But what Nora had done would teach them a costly lesson. Although everything she had done had a clear purpose, she never showed it outwardly. What she had done was not for revenge. She simply wanted to reclaim what belonged to her, and more importantly, to protect her son from those who had looked down on him and her family. She knew this game would continue, but she also knew that now, no one could stop the steps she and Tyler were taking. Nora sat in her office, the faint light of late afternoon filtering through the window, casting a soft golden hue across her desk. She was not in a hurry, nor did she feel any tension. Everything had already been prepared, and now all that remained was to wait. The moves she had made over time were beginning to show results. The shift, though not yet fully visible, was unfolding exactly as she had planned. Every conversation, every contract signed, had led her to a point of no return. And her goal was not simply to seize assets or power, it was to teach the Walsh family a lesson about arrogance and the consequences of underestimating others. Though she revealed nothing outwardly, Nora could sense the instability within the Walsh family. Gordon, despite maintaining a composed exterior, showed signs of fatigue, of losing control. The projects he once called gold were beginning to collapse. Partners were losing interest. Clients were withdrawing. Everything he had built seemed to be crumbling under his own hands. And all of it was the result of the contempt he and his family had shown her for so many years. Regina, Gordon's wife, appeared unaware of what was happening. She continued to uphold the image of a powerful, composed woman, always placing herself above others. The parties, the elite gatherings continued as usual, but Nora knew it was all just a facade. Once that surface cracked, the entire world of the Walsh family would collapse, and she would be the one to make them understand the price of looking down on others. Tyler, Nora's son, had now grown into a different man. Their story was no longer just about financial decisions, but about core values, about standing up to protect what deserved respect. Tyler, once treated as an outsider by the Walsh family, now understood more clearly than ever what his mother had done. He saw not only the financial transformation, but also the strength and growth within her. Nora had taught him that true power does not come from display or noise, but from stillness, from knowing how to control the game without anyone realizing it. Today, Tyler came to visit his mother after a long day of work. He was still overwhelmed by the changes she had brought about, but now he understood those steps more clearly. "Mom, I can't believe what you've done," Tyler said, his voice filled with admiration. "I've lived in the dark for so long, and now I realize that everything you've done has a purpose. You didn't just pull us out of the shadows, you helped me understand where true strength lies." Nora looked at her son, her gaze warm yet resolute. "My son, the greatest lesson I want you to learn is not about money or power, but about how to face hardship. Never let anyone think you are weak, and never let anyone believe that silence is submission. Sometimes, silence is the greatest strength." Her words echoed in Tyler's mind like a quiet melody, one he had never truly heard before. He had not realized that for all those years, his mother had lived in humility while carrying immense strength within her. The Walsh family, with all their wealth and power, still could not see that they were stepping into a game Nora had prepared long ago. She knew exactly what needed to be done, and she had acted with a calm precision that only someone who truly understands change could possess. That day, as Tyler spoke of his realization, Nora simply listened in silence. What she had done was not to stand out or to boast. Her purpose was to help her son understand that a person's value is not defined by what they show on the surface, but by what they can achieve while standing firmly on their own. Meanwhile, Gordon Walsh continued to face shocks from his partners. Those who once respected him were beginning to question his ability. Investments he once believed were safe were becoming burdens. And what troubled him most was not the financial difficulty, but the realization that he was losing a battle he never even knew he was fighting. As Nora watched everything unfold, she remained unhurried. She knew that with each passing day, the Walsh family would be forced to confront the truth. They had lived too long in the darkness of their own arrogance, and now it was time for the light to expose everything. No one could continue hiding behind that illusion of power. Nora had taught them a lesson about humility and the strength of silence, and she would continue to claim what she rightfully deserved. She had done what needed to be done, and now victory was within reach. That day, the air inside Nora's small house was strangely quiet. The chill of winter had settled over the little village where she lived, yet inside her, everything burned more intensely than ever. After weeks of preparation and careful moves, she knew it was time to receive the results of everything she had set in motion. Long-term plans were finally taking shape, and the silence she had maintained for so many years was beginning to bloom. But this transformation was not only about financial or real estate success, it came from something deeper, a shift in the way people saw her. Gordon Walsh, the man she once saw as part of the powerful world she had to face, was now slowly realizing that he had been wrong. Everything he took pride in was now slipping beyond control. The financial empires he built, the relationships he valued, were all beginning to fall apart. The friends and partners he believed would always stand by him were now gradually walking away. The stores, restaurants, and properties he once thought unshakable were now suffering serious decline. And what troubled him most was not the immediate financial difficulties, but the fact that he could not see how his own mistakes had led him to the edge of collapse. Regina, the wife who had always stood by Gordon, who believed everything belonged to them, was also beginning to feel the shift. Although she refused to accept the truth, the life of comfort she once felt secure in was slowly fading. The elite parties, the gatherings in luxurious villas, could no longer conceal the collapse approaching. She could still hold her head high and maintain her image of power, but deep inside, her arrogance was being tested. Nora, meanwhile, stood firm within her own stillness. She had done everything right. Every move, every decision had been calculated with care, without haste, without display. That was the strength she had carried within her for so many years, a strength that needed no show, no boasting, yet was capable of changing everything. She had created a game that even the Walsh family, with all their wealth and power, could not foresee. One morning, as Nora sat with Robert, the man who had helped her build everything, she could feel a clear shift in the atmosphere. On the other end of the line, his voice carried tension, but also unmistakable excitement. "We have everything now," Robert said. "Everything is in place. The Walsh family's Riverside project is now completely in your hands, and now you can move on to the next step." Nora gave a faint smile. What she had achieved was no longer just numbers on paper. This was real control. She not only owned the properties, she controlled the opportunities for future growth. Every move she had planned had reached its mark, and the collapse of the Walsh family was now only a matter of time. Meanwhile, Tyler, her son, had also begun to clearly understand what his mother had done. He was no longer the naive son who only knew her protection. Now he saw her clarity and decisiveness. He realized that his mother had prepared a future for him stronger than anything the Walsh family could ever offer. "I can't believe what you've done," Tyler said during a recent meeting. "You've changed everything. I don't understand how I failed to see your strength before." Nora simply nodded gently, her eyes filled with resolve. "You will understand, Tyler. I did everything for you, for us. Sometimes, victory does not come from what we show, but from silence, careful preparation, and long-term strategy." She knew Tyler had grown, and the lessons she gave him would not only guide him into the financial world, but also help him understand his true worth. What she had done was not merely to protect him, but to give him the chance to rise on his own, free from those who once believed he was nothing more than someone poor and insignificant. When the conversation ended, Nora stood up, stepped outside, and looked at the world around her. Everything was still peaceful, yet inside her, she could clearly feel that a world was changing. Now, everything belonged to her and Tyler, no longer something to be controlled by the Walsh family. She had won through patience, precision, and intelligence, and the price Gordon and Regina would pay would not stop at the loss of wealth. What they would truly face was the loss of their pride, the arrogance they had built for so many years. Nora knew that now. She no longer had to worry about the future. All that remained was to wait for the moment when the Walsh family would realize that they had brought about their own downfall, and that it was not revenge, but justice. On an early January morning, the air in the village was still bitterly cold, yet inside Nora, there was an unusual warmth. Outside, the winter wind swept across the vast fields, but within her small home, everything felt calm and still. And yet, she knew clearly that everything was changing, not only in her own life, but also in the world of the Walsh family. Everything she had done over the past months was beginning to surface. Every move, every decision, though quiet, was creating an undercurrent no one could have anticipated. Gordon Walsh, the man she once saw as a formidable opponent in a battle of power, was now facing problems he could no longer resolve. The projects he had once been proud of had turned into heavy debts. Shareholders and partners he believed would stand by him forever were now beginning to withdraw. They no longer believed in his capability. Everything he had built over the years had suddenly become a burden, and failure was drawing closer. Meanwhile, Regina, Gordon's wife, still failed to see the truth that the wealth and power their family had built over so many years were gradually slipping into someone else's hands. Although she continued to maintain her proud appearance, the lavish parties and gatherings in expensive villas went on as usual. It was all just a facade. After the rain, the light of truth would inevitably break through, and Nora had been preparing for that very moment. Nora gazed out the window, her eyes calm, yet her mind filled with thoughts. She had come a long way, from a quiet widow looked down upon by the Walsh family, to a powerful woman holding assets and opportunities they could never have imagined. Her steps were never rushed, never loud. They were slow, steady, and now she stood at the most critical point. At the same time, Tyler, her son, had fully grown. He no longer saw only the changes in his mother's life, but also within himself. She had not only transformed his life, she had helped him realize the true value of persistence and effort. Tyler was no longer the weak young man underestimated by the Walsh family. He was now a man capable of standing firm in a world filled with deception and arrogance. "Mom," Tyler said one late afternoon after a long day of work, "I can't believe everything you've done. What you've built has not only changed our lives, but has also taught me a valuable lesson about patience, strategy, and self-worth." Nora smiled gently. "You understand now, Tyler. Everything I've done was not just for us. I did it for you and for what we deserve. I want you to see that power does not come from money alone, but from how we use it. Patience, preparation, and strategy are the keys to changing everything." Tyler fell silent, absorbing every word. He understood that his mother had done everything to protect him from the shadow of the Walsh family. But at the same time, she had taught him that strength does not come from display or pride, but from quietly building and holding firm to one's own belief. At that same time, Gordon Walsh was beginning to feel the loss. Although he did not want to admit it, the truth was undeniable. Everything he once took pride in was gone. What he had built over the years was now beginning to crack. His partners, those who once stood behind him, were now starting to change their stance. His arrogance and self-satisfaction were damaging his own career. And what hurt the most was that he could not see that all of this was the result of mistakes he had made long ago. One evening, as Nora sat in her living room, the soft light casting a gentle glow across her face, she received a call from Robert. His voice carried tension, but also excitement. "Nora, we've won," Robert said. "The Riverside Shopping Center project is now completely in your hands. You have full control. Gordon's partners are starting to panic. They don't know what to do anymore." Nora smiled. "We didn't just win financially. The most important thing is that we have taught Gordon and Regina a lesson about arrogance." She knew that it was not just about money or power. What she truly sought was fairness. The Walsh family had been too self-satisfied, too dismissive of her, and now everything they would face was the price of their own decisions. Both Gordon and Regina would have to confront the consequences of the disrespect and contempt they had shown her for so many years. Nora looked out the window, where the cold winds still swept across the land. But inside her, everything was complete. The storm she had been preparing for so long had finally begun to sweep through, and she knew that at the end of this battle, she would be the one who stood victorious. That morning, as the first light of day filtered through the small window in Nora's living room, she felt nothing but a deep, profound stillness. The strategic moves, the shocks she had set in motion for the Walsh family, the decisions she had faced over many months had all led to results she had foreseen long ago. There was a sense of fulfillment, not the kind that shows itself outwardly, but one that comes from inner peace, from knowing she had done what was right. Everything was nearing completion, and she knew that her silence, the patience she had cultivated over so many years, had finally brought her everything she deserved. From the moment she began her plan, from the time she first sensed the arrogance and disdain of the Walsh family, Nora had never rushed. Every step was carefully calculated, every move thoroughly prepared, and now everything had come to the moment of reckoning. What the Walsh family once believed untouchable was now gradually slipping into her hands. not only in terms of finances, but in the way people began to see her and her family. Gordon and Regina, once so confident and arrogant, were now beginning to face the consequences of their own actions. Gordon, who had always seen himself as the powerful figure in the family, could no longer ignore the approaching failure. His projects, the assets he once took pride in, were beyond saving. Partners were pulling away, contracts were being terminated, and properties were being quietly but precisely taken over. Everything he had believed would protect him was now pushing him toward collapse. What unsettled him most was the helplessness, the realization that he could not even see how his past mistakes had led him to this point. As for Regina, although she continued to maintain her composed and confident appearance, she could not hide the anxiety within. The life she once believed was secure, the luxury, the elite gatherings she took pride in, were beginning to crack. It was all just a facade, and beneath it lay a collapse they could no longer stop. Regina still failed to see that while she struggled to maintain the image of a powerful family, she was living within a false reality she herself had built. Tyler, Nora's son, could now clearly see the changes around him. He was no longer the naive boy who relied solely on his mother's protection, but a grown man who understood the value of patience and strategy. What his mother had done was not only to protect him, but to show him that in this world, no one has the right to underestimate you because of your appearance or your background. "Mom, I truly can't believe what you've done," Tyler said one evening as they sat together. "You've changed everything. I don't understand how I failed to see before that you are not just a gentle mother, but a woman of immense strength." Nora smiled, her eyes filled with pride as she looked at her son. "You understand now, Tyler. The most important thing is to always believe in yourself. Never let anyone tell you that you are not worthy. Sometimes silence is the greatest strength." Her words settled deeply in Tyler's mind. He understood now that his mother was never just a simple woman, but someone who had built everything with precision and strategy, quietly and without display. The lessons she gave him were not just about money or wealth, but about standing firm in the face of challenges, about patience, resilience, and making the right strategic choices. When Nora received a call from Robert one morning, she knew that all her efforts had reached their peak. "Nora," Robert said over the phone, "we have everything. The Riverside Shopping Center project is now completely yours. The Walsh family no longer has control." Nora simply smiled, a gentle but resolute smile. "We didn't just win financially, Robert. More importantly, we showed them that arrogance never leads to lasting success." She knew this was not just about money. What truly mattered were the lessons she had taught the Walsh family, to Gordon and Regina. She no longer needed to prove anything. Everything was clear. What they once believed belonged to them was now gradually slipping into her and Tyler's hands. What she had done was not for money or power, but for fairness. She rose from her chair and stepped out into the garden. As she looked at the flowers in bloom, Nora felt an unusual sense of peace. Everything had reached its conclusion, and now she could look back with pride at what she had done. Not just to reclaim what was hers, but to show the Walsh family that no one can live forever in the shadow of arrogance and contempt. Everything she had wanted had been achieved, and her victory was not just a lesson in finance, but a lesson in resilience, self-respect, and calmness in every situation. Now, as she looked back, Nora knew she had been right, and everything would forever belong to her and her son. And so, Nora's story, a woman once looked down upon, has become a symbol of resilience, wisdom, and quiet strength. Every strategy, every decision she made was built on patience and self-respect, and now she has achieved what she truly deserved. It was not merely revenge, but fairness and real power, something she earned through careful and deliberate steps. This story is not only a lesson about finance, but also about believing in yourself and never allowing anyone to underestimate you. If you found this story inspiring, share it with those around you. Let them know that in life, nothing is impossible if you have enough patience and the right strategy. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories that will bring you valuable lessons. Thank you for watching, and remember, silence is the greatest strength.